Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to the UN General Assembly on September 26, 2025, seemed at first glance to be another ordinary diplomatic act. But for those who have spiritual discernment, it was something much bigger. What unfolded in that stately hall was perhaps the clearest prophetic sign our generation has ever witnessed. A true milestone in the end times. As Netanyahu took the podium to address the nations, something extraordinary happened. Whole rows of delegates stood up and began to leave. They were not just the traditional enemies of Israel. There were more than 77 nations, a coordinated, almost choreographed stampede, leaving the hall with half the seats empty and an eerie silence. It was as if the world was explicitly saying, "We don't want to hear what Israel has to say." But what few realized is that this was not just a political staging. It was a spiritual position, a direct fulfillment of Zechariah's prophecy, where Jerusalem would become a cup of trembling for all peoples. This abandonment, as symbolic as it is cold, showed that the nations are aligning themselves, not only against Israel, but against God's plan. We are seeing before our eyes the fulfillment of what the prophets warned us about millennia ago, and the most impressive thing is that everything revolves around a small city, without oil, without large ports, without overwhelming military power. Still, Jerusalem dominates the headlines, moves the decisions of the UN, provokes protests in New York, London, Tehran. Why? Because the problem is not geographical, it is prophetic. It is spiritual. The world is not reacting to a policy, it is reacting to a promise. And the question now is, are you seeing this, or do you still think it's all a coincidence? It was as if the whole world was in front of a prophetic stage. Netanyahu took to the podium of the United Nations with a firm countenance, knowing that his words about Israel and Jerusalem would not only be political, but an echo of ancient prophecy. When he opened his mouth, the tension was palpable, and suddenly more than 70 nations stood up and left the hall, as if a choreography had been rehearsed behind the scenes of history. This movie-worthy scene reminded every observer that there are invisible forces moving the pieces on the world chessboard. For many, that was just a diplomatic protest. But for those who know the scriptures, it was impossible not to remember that Zechariah himself had spoken of a time when Jerusalem would become a cup of trembling for all the peoples around. Think with me. Have you ever stopped to notice how a speech of a few minutes can generate so much international discomfort? It is as if each sentence had the weight of 1,000 tons. This shaking was not just political, it was spiritual. A practical example of this is to see how the news deals with the case. While some spoke of political isolation, others highlighted the warning for the end of times. See how different it is when looking at it through a human or spiritual lens. If you open a contemporary history book, you will see that rarely has a public speech caused such a coordinated reaction. This shows that Israel is not just any nation, it is God's prophetic clock. And here's the key: this clash at the UN was not an isolated episode. It was another piece fitted into the puzzle of the end times. Jerusalem and Israel remain in the spotlight, fulfilling word after word of prophecy. And of course, this episode makes room for something even deeper. Because if the scene at the UN has already caused astonishment, what will come next will be even more disturbing. Many saw that stampede at the United Nations as just a matter of foreign policy. However, those who look beyond the surface realize this was prophecy in action. From the time of Zechariah, the announcement was already on record. Israel would be placed at the center of controversy, and the nations would turn against Jerusalem. Isn't it fascinating to realize that what seemed like just a gesture of diplomatic protest actually fulfilled a script written thousands of years ago? It's like when you read a story and suddenly realize that you're living inside it. Imagine opening the Bible to Zechariah 12 and then watching the UN news showing Israel's isolation. Coincidence? Hardly. Those who have spiritual eyes understand that what is happening today is not improvisation, it is fulfillment. The abandonment of Israel on that platform was a clear message. The prophecies not only exist, but continue to be fulfilled before our eyes. A practical example of how to apply this understanding is to change the way we consume news. Instead of just being indignant or moved by the facts, how about opening the scriptures and reading in parallel what was prophesied? Just as some do parallel readings of newspapers with economics books to understand the backstage of the market, the Christian can read the news with Zechariah, Daniel, or Revelation by his side. This practice generates discernment and avoids falling into shallow narratives. This episode of abandonment was not just about Netanyahu or Israel. It was an open window to see that the stage of the end times is being set up. Politics may even try to give explanations, but the spiritual reality goes much further. And if this is already happening now, what about the next stages of the prophetic line that are yet to come? Jerusalem has always been more than a city. It doesn't matter if you look at it as Israel's capital, spiritual center, or tourist spot. The truth is that it carries a weight that no other city in the world has. Zechariah had already prophesied Jerusalem would be a cup of trembling for all the peoples around. And look, there is no international meeting, either at the UN or at any summit, in which his name is not at the center of tensions. It's almost as if the whole world has a nerve exposed when it comes to this city. The curious thing is that Jerusalem does not have the natural riches of other lands, nor the size of a great global metropolis. Even so, it dominates the news. Why? Because there is the spiritual stage of humanity. It was in Jerusalem that the temple was erected. It was there that Christ was crucified. And it is there that, according to prophecy, he will return. It is no exaggeration to say that Jerusalem is the spiritual heart of the planet, and any movement on it reverberates like a worldwide earthquake. If you observe, you will see how this manifests itself on a daily basis. All it takes is a decision to build a new neighborhood in Jerusalem for headlines to explode in newspapers in London, Washington, and Moscow. Can you imagine? A simple open street in Jerusalem generates more diplomatic noise than an economic crisis in an entire country. This shows that we are facing something that transcends human logic and confirms what Zechariah declared thousands of years ago. And the most instigating thing is that this cup of trembling has not yet been drunk in its entirety. What is already causing political crises and protests at the UN is just the beginning. There is a point in the prophecy when Jerusalem will become a heavy stone for all nations, and whoever tries to move it will be torn to pieces. But this is precisely what we will begin to realize in the next events. Jerusalem is not just a cup of trembling, it is also described as a heavy stone by Scripture. And look, it's not just any stone. Zechariah 12 states that whoever tries to move it will be torn to pieces. Strong, right? But think with me, how many nations, leaders, and empires have tried over the centuries to reconfigure Jerusalem's status? Babylon, Rome, the Ottoman Empire, and to this day, modern powers try to manipulate their fate, always with severe consequences. It's no coincidence. We are talking about a city that bears a celestial imprint with a unique role in God's plans. When a modern government, whether via the UN or bilateral agreements, tries to force decisions on Jerusalem, there invariably arises a chain reaction, conflicts, economic collapses, diplomatic tensions. It is as if touching Jerusalem is touching a spiritual bomb about to explode, and those who dare to try to move the stone end up crushed by the very weight of error. Take the case of presidents and foreign ministers who have tried to redraw Israel's borders or divide Jerusalem. Many of them face political downfalls, scandals, or resounding failures soon after. We are not saying that everything is punishment, but rather that there is a spiritual line drawn there, and those who cross that line pay a price. It is like trying to change the boundaries of something that God has already determined with surgical precision. And if Jerusalem already represents this unbearable burden for governments today, imagine what it will be like when issues like the temple and the alliance with the Antichrist come into play. Yes, that's in the prophetic line as well. But before we go there, we need to understand how it all began since 1948. The prophetic timeline has been unfolding with astonishing accuracy. The prophetic timeline began to accelerate in a clear way in 1948. That year, against all political and military odds, Israel was reborn as a nation. It was as if a dry bone had come to life, just as in Ezekiel 37. The international community watched with their mouths open, and even those who do not believe in prophecy could not ignore the symbolism. From then on, the prophetic hand of the clock began to move in a visible way. Jerusalem was returning to the focus of history. The Six-Day War in 1967 was another milestone. Israel, attacked from all sides, won in just 6 days and retook Jerusalem. It sounds like a movie plot, but it was real and prophetic. Zechariah and Daniel were already talking about the control of Jerusalem returning to the Jewish people. And this happened in front of the cameras of the world, without manipulation, without makeup. There the temple was mentioned again with more intensity. And the prayers for the return of Christ began to gain even more prophetic meaning. In recent years, the Abraham Accords have surprised the international scene as an echo of the words of peace and security mentioned in 1 Thessalonians. These treaties brought Arab nations closer to Israel, something unthinkable decades ago. But notice, this peace is not absolute and perhaps not even lasting. It's like the calm before the storm. While the UN and leaders like Netanyahu try to position themselves, the stage continues to be set, millimeter by millimeter. Jerusalem is not just a capital. It is a symbol, it is an altar, it is a promise. Mount Moriah, where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, is the same place where the temple was built. And more, it was there in the vicinity of this city that Christ himself was crucified. Nothing in Jerusalem is by chance. It is as if every stone, every hill, and every alley carries a chapter in the history of redemption. And that is why it bothers the world so much, because it reminds man that there is a God above all political structure. Imagine a place where heaven has touched the earth several times. It was in Jerusalem that the glory of God filled the temple. It was there that Jesus wept at the unbelief of the people. It was there that the veil was torn, announcing that access to God was open. And it will be there that he will return, according to the prophecy of Zechariah 14. The city is the link between the past, the present, and the future of faith. It's like an eternal clock pointing to Christ's return, and there's no ignoring it. For those who want to understand the Bible in depth, studying the biblical geography of Jerusalem is essential. Books like Jerusalem, the City of the Great King by Derek Prince, or The Jerusalem Factor by John Hagee are great starts. They show how spiritual events and political decisions intersect at a single geographical point. Jerusalem is the center where everything meets: prophecy, sacrifice, promise, and future glory. And it is precisely for this immeasurable spiritual value that the city is so attacked. The enemy has always tried to desecrate what is holy. And if Jerusalem bears the seal of divine promise, it is natural that darkness should try to erase it from the map. But if the world is already lining up against this city, what about Israel's increasing isolation today? If you watch the news closely, you'll notice a pattern repeating itself. Israel is increasingly isolated. The UN, which should be a neutral body, constantly passes resolutions against Jerusalem. It is as if there was a collective discomfort with the existence of the Jewish people on that piece of land. But why so much trouble? The answer goes beyond geopolitics. It is in the spiritual field. This isolation is another line drawn by prophecy, and it is being fulfilled before our eyes. Iran, Turkey, and Russia form an increasingly aligned triad, politically, militarily, and ideologically, against Israel. Coincidence? Not at all. If you turn to Ezekiel 38 and 39, you will see these names, or their ancestral regions, highlighted in the prophecy of the Battle of Gog and Magog. The interesting thing is that this alliance was previously unlikely. Now it forms with frightening speed, as if something is speeding up the times. This is not conspiracy theory, it is literal fulfillment of the word. For those who think that this does not affect their daily lives, it is time to rethink. When Israel is attacked, the whole world feels a reflex. Oil rises, markets oscillate, tensions rise. Everything is connected. If the Christian ignores these signs, he ends up spiritually asleep. A good practice is to follow international news with discernment, comparing it with Scripture. Tools such as the Watchman app or the newsletters of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem help to see the scenario with biblical clarity. This growing isolation is pushing Israel into an inevitable prophetic place. At some point, even your closest allies will drift away. And when that happens, someone will emerge promising peace, a charismatic diplomatic figure with the power to unite nations. Yes, we are approaching the time when the Antichrist will enter the scene. But this is exactly what the next prophetic sign reveals to us. In the midst of chaos, wars, and dark alliances, there is a promise that shines like a beacon on a stormy night: the return of Christ. Zechariah 14:4 is clear. In that day your feet will be on the Mount of Olives. Imagine this, an event so literal, so impactful, that it will split the mountain in half. It is not metaphor, it is not prophetic poetry. It is the Son of God himself, returning to the exact place from which he ascended, closing the cycle with majesty. This scene, although it seems distant to some, is closer than many people imagine. The Mount of Olives is still there, firm, silent, waiting for the moment when it will no longer be just a tourist spot and become the scene of a cosmic rupture. And when Christ steps there, every eye will see. It will be impossible to deny. The return of the King will be visible, real, and definitive. Jerusalem will be the center of this reunion between heaven and earth. For those who live as if everything is going to continue as it always was, this event will seem shocking. But those who watch for the signs, such as the isolation of Israel, the rise of the Antichrist, the rebuilding of the temple, know that we are not dealing with religious fiction. Christ's return will be the climax of a meticulous plan. And more, it will be the restoration of everything that has been corrupted. A new time will begin, and nothing will be the same as before. And in the face of this truth, an inevitable question remains: how should we live? The answer lies in vigilance, hope, and preparation. Because when the King returns, he will not come as a lamb, he will come as a lion, and Jerusalem, once rejected, will become the throne of the world. But before that, there is an urgent call for believers, a direct invitation to those who love the city of the great King. In the face of all this, it is no longer possible to live as if nothing was happening. The call to Christians is clear. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Psalm 122:6. And here it is not a question of a generic or empty sentence. It is a strategic call. To pray for Jerusalem is to align with God's eternal plan. It's like holding on to one of the ropes that moves the sky toward the earth. It is actively participating in prophetic history, even if we are thousands of miles away. Remaining firm in the faith is another urgent requirement. In a time where even within the churches what is sacred is relativized, the Christian needs a spiritual backbone. To stand on the Word in prayer and in fellowship with the saints is the minimum. Want a practical example? Start your day by reading not just one verse, but entire chapters. Study Zechariah, Daniel, Matthew 24, and Revelation seriously. It is there that the maps of time are drawn. Moreover, seeing the prophetic signs is not a gift reserved for mystics. It is a skill that any Christian can develop, as long as he is willing to observe with discernment. Do you know that news that airs at the end of the night? Try watching it with the Bible by your side. The experience changes. You start noticing patterns, connections, confirmations. The spiritual and the natural begin to converse before your eyes. This call is not for the spiritual elite. It is for me, for you, for anyone who claims to follow the Messiah. And if we are already seeing the stage set up, the costumes prepared, and the actors entering the scene, what is missing? Maybe just the curtain will open. And here comes Israel's deeper role in the end times, something that goes far beyond politics or religion. Israel's history still holds chapters that will shake the world. The first of these is perplexing, the future covenant with the Antichrist. Yes, according to Daniel 9:27, Israel will enter into a 7-year covenant with this world leader, believing that it is securing peace. But it will be a tragic mistake. It will be like trusting in a shadow clothed in light. Many will see this as a diplomatic victory, but spiritually, it will be the beginning of a great tribulation. The deception will seem so logical that the inattentive will applaud. Then will come one of the most symbolic moments, the rebuilding of the temple. This is no longer theory. There are already architectural plans, pieces of furniture, priests being trained, and even the red heifer under observation. The temple will function again, rekindling a spiritual centrality in Jerusalem. But that same place will be desecrated by the Antichrist, as Jesus warned in Matthew 24:15. In other words, the same temple that symbolizes faith will be the scene of the greatest spiritual betrayal in history. And then, in the midst of pain and persecution, something powerful will happen: Israel's national repentance. Zechariah 12:10 speaks of a day when the people will look upon him whom they have pierced and weep for him as for an only son. It will be a mass awakening. The veil will be removed, and that same people who today are rejected by so many will become the epicenter of the most intense revival ever seen on earth. Imagine Israel on its knees, recognizing Yeshua as the Messiah. Eventually, Israel will be exalted as a center of worldwide worship. The Lord will reign from Jerusalem. Nations will rise year after year to worship the King. Zechariah 14:16. The city that today is a reason for division will be a source of unity. No more wars, no more failed peace summits, but a kingdom of justice and glory. And all this is already written. The question now is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Now that you understand the prophetic scenario that is unfolding before your eyes, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to keep it to yourself as if it were just another biblical curiosity? Or will he really take a stand? Because, let's face it, knowing that God's clock is ticking and continuing to live as if nothing is happening, it's a risk that no one should take. Have you been praying for Jerusalem? Have you sought to discern the prophetic signs? Have you been spiritually preparing for Christ's return? Or are you still waiting for everything to go back to normal? Spoiler, it won't come back. Prophecy has no pause button, and those who ignore this are spiritually distracted. This is the time to align yourself with heaven, with the Word, and with God's eternal purpose. Now tell me, what caught your attention the most in this prophetic script? Where have you realized that all of this is real, urgent, and non-negotiable? Comment below. I really want to know your view on all this. Let's exchange ideas, grow together, and strengthen ourselves as a living and attentive church. And of course, if this content has opened your eyes, subscribe now to the channel, activate the bell, and share it with those who need to understand that the end times is not a conspiracy theory. It is the truth that has already begun. And believe me, the best is yet to come. For those who are ready,